Well, we've been looking at Joseph for the last couple of weeks, and we saw Joseph. He was firstborn of Rachel's, and he was Jacob's favorite. And we know his brothers hated him. He was a dreamer. He got sold to Egypt, and he went to prison. And when we left off, he'd been brought before Pharaoh, and he laid out. He told Pharaoh his dream and gave Pharaoh a plan for handling the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of drought. That's where we kind of were left off. We're in chapter 41 of Genesis, and as we continue to look at Joseph's life, the thing that we see here that is a constant is Joseph glorifies God. He gives God the glory, gives God the credit for the dreams. He gives God the credit for the things that are happening, to the point that even Pharaoh recognizes and makes the comment that said that God had showed Joseph all these things. And so even Pharaoh himself, who recognized that Joseph's God. And so we find in verse 46 of chapter 41 that Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, and he laid out the dream. And then if we look at starting in verse 50, we know that Pharaoh had gave Joseph a wife, the priest in Egypt. What was his name? He gave the wife of Astaroth, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On, to him. Joseph has two sons. In verse 50 it says, and Joseph were born two sons before the years of the famine came. So in other words, they're born during the years of plenty, whom Asedath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. Here's what Manasseh means: for God had made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. Okay, and the name of the second he called Ephraim. Again, here's the name: for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. So here's the two boys. The first one, Manasseh, who's born, that Joseph says that God has made me forget all the things that had went on with his brothers. I mean, you can imagine the hurt that he may have carried, with what his brothers did. And the second, Ephraim, which means God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Okay. And then it says in 53, then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended. All right. And the 7 years of famine began to come. And Joseph, as Joseph had said, the famine was in all lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. Why? Why was there bread in Egypt? They prepared. Joseph had told Pharaoh need to put away 20%, right? So they put away 20% of the goods, stored them up, and so we find that so when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to the Egyptians, go to Joseph, whatever he says to you do. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all the land. So when we get this picture and we understand this, is that the famine had gotten so bad that it had taken up all the land in all the countries around there. It was such a severe famine that people were hearing, well, there's bread in Egypt, let's go to Egypt and get. So can you imagine, if you think about this, 7 years of plenty, putting back 20% for these 7 years of plenty, that is a lot of grain. That is a lot of food and that they have put back, not only just to take care of the Egyptians, but to take care of the world in that day, right? And so when we think about that today, I mean, putting back, if we're able to put back 20% of what we get for those rainy days, then it sustains us through those hard times. You know, if you think about it today, that people, you know, the ones that were able to save and put back for rainy days, that when this drought and things were shut down, it didn't affect them the way it may have affected somebody that was living payday to payday, right? And that's the idea behind it, is that idea of putting away for that rainy day, that those hard times when they come. And so here's this drought that's come, and we know the reason for the drought. We know the reason that Joseph was sent to Egypt. We understand all that because we've read the book. So the drought has gotten so bad that it's even, as we go into chapter 42, we find that it's affected Jacob and his family, okay? You look in verse 42, verse 1, it says, when Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, why do you look at one another? And he said, indeed, I have heard that there's grain in Egypt. Go down so to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die. So it's affected them to the point that Jacob, kind of a funny thing, that Jacob, here's the head of the house. Jacob looks to these, 10 sons, because Benjamin is probably not old enough. He's probably a teenager now, but he looks to these 10 boys and said, why are y'all looking around here? You know there's no food. Go to Egypt and buy us some food. So what we find here now is, you remember Jacob or Joseph's dream that you'll bow down to me, right? Well, this is fixing to happen. Okay, and so they go down to Egypt to buy food. So he sent his 10 boys. In verse 3 says, so Joseph 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. So the famine has reached Canaan. And if you go back earlier in Genesis, I'm trying to remember what chapter it is, but 13 or 14, God tells Abraham that your descendants are going to be in captivity for 400 years, okay? And this is what we're getting ready. They're going to Egypt, because this is all what God's plan is to bring them into Egypt and them to go into captivity for 400 years. That's God's plan, okay? And so here we have them, these boys going down to Egypt to buy grain. They don't recognize Joseph, okay? It's been 13 years, okay? And you sit there and say, well, you'd still think they would recognize their brother. Well, the difference is when he left, at 17, he may have had a beard. He had long hair. Now he looks what? He looks like what? An Egyptian. He shaved head, got no hair on him at all, and he wearing these weird clothes, so here he looks like an Egyptian. And so we know that Joseph's the governor of the land, and that people, whenever they came, they had to seek Joseph to get food. They had to go to Joseph. And it says in Joseph, if you look at verse 6, it says, and Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. It said Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke to them, the Bible says, harshly. He spoke to them in a rough way, okay? He accused them of being what? Spies, right? Yeah. Yep. He accused them of being spies. Y'all have come down here to spy out our land. And he asked them, he said, where they came from, they said from the land of Canaan. And it tells us in verse 8, so Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them and said to them, you are spies, you have come to see the nakedness of the land. In other words, you come down here to spy us out and to attack us, if you will. Of course, and they said to him, no, but my Lord, but your servants have come to buy food. Okay. Why do you think that Joseph did that? Why do you think that Joseph, accused them of being spies? Why was Joseph being rough with them, you reckon?
They didn't know who he was.
Okay, they didn't know who he was.
They didn't recognize him, so he says, there's maybe a little vengeance.
It may have had a little vengeance. It may have been to.
Let me treat you like you just treated me.
Yeah. Well, and I think along those lines, it may have been to see, have they changed?
Yeah.
In other words, are you going to do each other the way you did me? How are you going to act with this under a little bit of pressure, a little bit of sarcasm? But Joseph goes on telling him, he says, no, but you're spies, and they said your servants are 12 brothers, and this is what, look at verse 13. He said, they said, your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan, and in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more. And Joseph said, yeah, that's me. One is no more. So because they have no idea where Joseph is. They don't even know what happened. As a matter of fact, in their mind, he's probably dead. Joseph's gone. Okay. But Joseph went on to say to them in verse 14, it is as I spoke to you, saying, you are spies, in this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you. Or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. So Joseph says, I'm going to test you. I'm going to see if there's any truth in you. And so what we find here is, so he put them all together in prison 3 days. Then Joseph said to them, the third day, do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you go and carry grain for the famine of your houses, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified and you shall not die. And they did so. Then they said to one another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore this desire has come upon us. So now they're reflecting back to what? Joseph. They're reflecting back to this. Now we're seeing the anguish of, because what we're finding is, and as we talked last week or the week before, can you imagine how Joseph, when his brothers come and grab him and throw him in a pit, and then turn around and sell him, and I can imagine him sitting there, don't do this, don't, and they sell him and he's gone, no more, he's out of sight, and so we find, and Reuben answered, saying, did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy, and you would not listen? Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he turned himself away from them and wept. Then he returned to them again and talked with them, and took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. So here's Simeon, one of the boys that's going to be put in captivity until they return. Now, we don't know how long they're gone. I would speculate they're gone a long time, right? And the reason is because they run out of food again, right? Now, Jacob, you can go back and we're gonna see this heartache, if you will, and they tell Jacob what goes on, and Jacob says, "You're not taking Benjamin. You're not taking Benjamin down there. I've already lost one son. I'm not losing another one. Simeon's down there already," and so he's willing to give up Simeon because Benjamin is now the youngest boy, and he's truly connected. Jacob and Benjamin are connected. I mean, that's his son in his really old age, right?
He did not take the firstborn. He didn't take Reuben. He took Simeon.
Right.
The second one.
Right.
There's got to be a reason for that because of the lineage.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know what was the reason why Simeon, why he chose Simeon. I'm not sure. But whether that was just something he wanted or, but Simeon's the one that was put in prison, and it may very well been because he was the second born. It may not to take Reuben, because Reuben was apparently even here the one that was leading. He was the one that was taking the forefront of all this, and you remember it was Reuben who wanted to go back and get him out of the pit, right? And so Reuben, if you look down at verse 37 of chapter 42, it says, "Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying," he says, "Kill my two sons if I do not bring him back to you, but put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you." But he said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave." So Reuben you see his heart. He says, "Here, take my two boys, take my sons, your grandsons, take them, but let me take Benjamin with me, because we can't go get bread without him." And so we find in verse 43, so if you think about, if they were given, let's just assume they were given a year's supply of food, all right? And so here Simeon has been in jail 3 months, 6 months, a year. We don't know. We just know he's been there long enough that they've ran out of food again, right? The famine, and we know there's been 7 years of the drought. The drought is severe. They probably are in day or year 3 or 4 of the drought, right? And that they're in, and so they've run out of food again. And in verse 40, or in chapter 1 of verse 43, it says, verse 1 of chapter 43, it says, "Now the famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass, when they had eaten up the grain which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said, 'Go back and buy a little food.' But Judah spoke to him." Okay, now here's Judah stepping up. Judah spoke to him, saying, "The man solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.' And Israel said, 'Why did you deal so wrongly with me as to tell the man whether you had another brother?'" In other words, why did you tell him that you had another brother? And of course, then they sit there and say, "Well, he asked us all these questions," and so it comes out. So, finally, his father agrees to let Benjamin go. And so they go down there, and they stand before Joseph again. they took back. Remember when they left, and let me kind of back up. You remember when they left, Joseph put all their money back in their bags, right? When they left, so they found their money. So if you look at verse 15 of chapter 43, it says, "So the men took that present and Benjamin, and they took double money in their hand, and arose and went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph." It says, when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his household, "Take these men to my home and slaughter an animal and make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon." Then the man did as Joseph ordered, and the man brought them in. So they go and they go to Joseph's house, and they're there, and Joseph says that he wanted Benjamin to stay with him, right? And he had to take, or let me rephrase that. They go down there and they have a meal with him. Joseph has to leave because he's crying. He meets with them, and he gives them their food, and he gives them all their money back, and he takes his cup, right, and puts it in Benjamin's bag. And they leave. Then Joseph sends guards to them because someone has stole his cup, right? Remember how he did it? And so I think it's Reuben, or one of them, that says, it says, jumping up to 43, then one of them says, and let me just kind of read this to you. In 44:1, he says, "And he commanded the steward of the house, saying, Fill the men's sacks with food as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. Also put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his grain money." So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning dawned, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. When they had gone out of the city and were not yet far off, Joseph said to his steward, "Get up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, Why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this one from which my Lord drinks, and with which is indeed practices divination? You have done evil in so doing." So he overtook them, and they said to him, "Why does my Lord say these words? Far be it from us that your servants should do such a thing. Look, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money which we found in the mouth of our sack. How then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? With whomever," and here you go, verse 9, "with whomever of your servants it is found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves." Well, guess what? He found the cup in Benjamin's bag. And so it says that as they started looking, he says they found, he said, "Shall be the slave, and you shall be blameless." Then each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each opened his sack. So he searched, and he began with the oldest and left with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. And look, in 13, then they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. Everybody comes back. So Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there, and they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said to them, "What deed is this you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination?" Said, "What shall we say to my Lord?" This is Judah. "What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are my Lord's slave, but we and he also with whom the cup is found." But he said, "Far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. As for you, go up in peace to your father." So Joseph said, "You're all welcome to leave, but Benjamin stayed." Here's the thing that I think that's important for us to understand. You know, when you sit here and say, why in the world it seems like Joseph is taking out revenge. But what I think Joseph is doing is Joseph is checking to see if his brothers have changed. I mean, they were so angry. They got rid of him. Now here's Benjamin, and he uses Benjamin, who is the youngest, who's connected to his father, just as Joseph was, right? And so he's using Benjamin as a tool to see if his brothers have changed. Will they go back and lie to their dad again? Will they go back and tell him something else? But I want you to notice what Judah says to Joseph in verse 18. It said, then Judah came near to him and said, "O my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's hearing, and do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servant, saying, have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, who is young. His brother is dead, and he is alone. And he alone is left with his mother's children. His father loves him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down. And we said to my Lord, the lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. But you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall see my face no more. So it was when we went up to your servant my father that we told him the words of my Lord. And your father said, go back and buy us a little food. But we said, we cannot go if our youngest brother is not with us. Then we will go and not see he says, for we may not see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Then your servant my father said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one went out from me, and I said, surely he is torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls him, you shall bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. So this is, and they are telling all this to Joseph, right? Judah is. I can imagine Joseph's heart and how it's swelling up and everything that's going on. He says, now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servant will bring down the gray hair. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. Now therefore, please, and here you go, let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go to my father if the lad is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father? There's the changed heart. That's the thing that I think Joseph was looking for, was to see, are you going to do the same thing again? Because before they didn't care about their dad, right? 13 years earlier, they didn't care about how it may have affected it. They just wanted Joseph out of their lives. Now here they're more concerned about their dad than they are Benjamin, right? And so Joseph sees this change in their heart, and so it breaks down, and Joseph reveals to them who he is.
He obviously had a heart for them because he asked if their father was still alive.
Oh, yeah.
They had brothers, so he obviously had some love there, and he was wondering about his dad.
Oh yeah, yeah.
His baby thing.
Yeah, so he's getting all this information, and so when he finally tells them that hey, I'm Joseph, you know this is the thing that here they've lived this lie for 13 years, and now it's revealed I am Joseph. How do you go back and say, Dad, hey, Joseph's alive?
Yeah.
How do you go back and say, how do you do that? How do you go? Yeah. Of course, they never said that Joseph was dead. They just brought a ripped up coat to him, and he made the assumption he was dead. But the thing that's important for us to see here is that Joseph was sent there to save Israel, to save God's people, and so Joseph, after he deals with his brother, and they wept, and I can imagine as they go back home and they said, hey Dad, guess what? The second in command in Egypt is your long lost son Joseph. Yeah. But even then, even Joseph or even Jacob comes and bows down before, just as the dream said. He all that is fulfilled in the life of through this dream. Everything happened that's spoken of. So you jumping over to 46, Jacob journeys to Egypt. He goes to Egypt. And here comes the children of Israel. How many are there? Was it 70 of them? I think it was.
70.
Yeah, that Israel, I believe it was, that came into Egypt and lived there. I think it's probably in the first part of Exodus that tells us that. Yeah. So they come into Egypt, and so they come down in verse 48, or I'm sorry, verse 47. Then Joseph went out and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brothers, their flocks and their herds and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan, and indeed they are in the land of Goshen. And he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? Of course, they tell him what he is. Joseph brought in his father in verse 7, Jacob, and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of the pilgrimage. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them the possession in the land of Egypt and the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Then Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with bread according to the number of their families. And then the rest of chapter 47, Joseph deals with the famine in the land. He addresses, people end up having to give their livestock. They end up giving their property. They end up giving everything to make it through the famine to Pharaoh. And then Pharaoh ends up owning everything. But what they do is that they are given the land. Joseph gives them the land back, and they are to give, I think it's a fifth, 20% on a continuous basis back to them. Let me just make sure that I got that right, and we'll close with that. So in verse 20, it says, Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. For every man of the Egyptians sowed his field, because the famine was severe upon them. So the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he moved them into the cities, from one end of the borders of the Egypt to the other end. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priest had rations allotted to them by Pharaoh. And they ate the rations which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their lands. Then Joseph said to the people, indeed, I have bought you and your land this day for Pharaoh. Look, here is the seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And it shall come to pass in the harvest that you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh. 4/5 shall be your own as seed for the field and for your food, for those of your households and for the food of your little ones. So they said, you have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt to this day that Pharaoh should have 1/5, except for the land of the priest only, which did not become Pharaoh's. So 1/5. So the people managed the land, and so what it really became is what? Kind of a tax, right? 20%. 20% of it comes to Pharaoh, and you farm the land. You keep 80%. Pharaoh gets 20.
Beginning of the IRS.
Huh?
Beginning of the IRS.
Beginning of the IRS. It could be true, yeah. So, but what it also shows us is that idea of there is a way of managing, a way of taking care of stuff and providing, and so they had to learn from generation to generation that 20% of it went here. We have ours, taken out. Right, our taxes. I mean, I wish our country would just come up with a flat tax and be done with it. I don't have to worry about the IRS or anything. Just tell me I need to give 10%, and it's yours, and be done with it. But we don't work that way.
But as things change in our life, incomes go down, incomes go up.
Right.
It changes. So the first thing you have to do, and goes without saying, is your tithe.
Yeah.
You have to tithe upon what your income is, or in some cases drops.
Well, that's why it always
God
works.
provides.
Yeah, that's why it works. God works off of percentage and not off of flat thing. I mean, it's all about percentages. Yeah, and then because you always have that same percentage, and like the widow's mite kind of thing. Yeah. So anyhow, we'll finish up with Joseph next week, and as we conclude, and we'll also look at what Jacob did with his boys. I don't know that we covered and looked at of the blessings that he gave to his son, each one of them at the end, but we'll look at that also next week. All right?
We're in 47.
Sure.
14.
Yeah.
Towards the end.
Yeah. Sure.